All right, so we have insert mesh brushes in our belt. So let's do a modification or variation of the insert mesh brush, and that is adding a curve to that. So what does that mean? Let's go to our simple brush here. We're going to grab a cube 3D, drag it on our canvas, go into edit mode, make polymesh 3D, and I guess we can turn on polyframe as well. So with this selected, and we go to brush, insert, primitive, M, and grab a sphere and drag it on your canvas, or drag it on your object, you're going to see it's going to stick to the object, and you can keep dragging out more and more of these spheres. However, if we take the stroke menu and we dock it over here, we're going to be going through the stroke and brush menu, so I'm going to have them both docked in this left-hand side. Just double click this divider. If you go over here to curve, hold down shift, turn open curve functions, curve modifiers. If you turn curve mode on with that sphere selected, now when I drag this out, it's going to be a string of spheres. So you're going to see right down the middle of this thing is a curve. And you're also going to see as I go away from the curve, my cursor is red. As I get closer to the curve, it's going to turn blue. When the cursor is blue, that means that is a curve manipulator. So we can just move and drag this curve around when it's blue. However, when it's red, I can change my brush size. So I can make my brush size bigger. And then when I tap the curve again, it's going to increase the size of whatever that curve is made out of. If I tap my S key and make it smaller, there it's going to be smaller if I tap and update the curve. So you can use that to indicate how big your curve object is going to be. And when you hover over this, that is when it turns blue, and now you can manipulate this. You're going to see it sticking to my object as I drag it around. It's kind of going thump, 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 thump over this cube. That is because we have snap turned on. If you turn off snap, it's going to go right through the object. If you turn it back on, it's going to want to snap to the object. If you turn bend off, that's going to take away the bend functionality. So now it's still going to want to snap. You can see as I drag it over, it's going to want to snap this object to it, but it's not going to let it bend. So generally speaking, bend and snap is usually on. And let's say I want to add to the end of this. What I can do is I can go to the end of this curve and see a little rubber band that sticks out there. If you go too far away, it's going to drag a new curve. It's going to keep this one. It's going to auto mask it just like when we were insert masking or insert mesh brushing. If you go down here to auto masking, you're going to see auto mask mesh insert. That applies to curve brushes as well. And again, this is just an insert mesh brush with a curve applied. So of course that makes sense that it would still be that way. However, if we undo this, we get closer to this one, that rubber band, it'll go ahead and connect. So as long as that rubber band sticks, it'll go ahead and connect. If you want to make that rubber band longer, that's that curve snap distance right here. If we crank that up to 100, now that rubber band will snap out of the end of here way far away. Now, honestly, that ends up being a little bit more trouble than it's worth a lot of times. So if you're dragging and you say you want to make a new, it's like, I like this one, I want to make a new one down here. So I go down here and I start dragging. If you're too close to the end of that one, it's going to wrap it back around. So if that's annoying to you, change your curve snap distance down so it doesn't grab onto it, and then you can just start a new line here. So as long as you're nowhere near this line, you can keep dragging more and more lines, and it's going to go ahead and keep the original ones. So let's go ahead and do all that. So we've got a cube here. We can drag a curve on it. And as long as it doesn't have subdivision history, you can drag a curve. If for some reason you are using it on an object that does have subdivision history, you can use the same trick we did earlier where we append a null object. So this one's going to be just hiding right inside of here. Let's go ahead and scale it down just a little bit so it's well out of the way. But as long as this is visible, the cube is visible, and this is selected, you can even turn on X symmetry, and now you can drag a curve on both sides. You can manipulate it. You're also going to notice we have liquid and elastic. So if we turn elastic on, and we drag this out, if you just drag from the end, that's going to kind of keep a straight line. So you can go drag from the end, drag from the end, drag from the end, and you can kind of make straight curves like this. And if you drag backwards, it's going to delete a little bit. There we go. You can kind of get it to kind of start deleting back through, so just click and drag to kind of delete. If you use liquid, you can pull out from the bottom, and this one will be a little bit more curvy, so you can kind of liquid lay these out, and if you drag back through, if I remember correctly, this one deletes a little bit better. So you can liquid your way back to make these curves shorter. Now let's say we like this curve, or we like this object here, and we're ready to just commit it, and we don't want to start drawing another one. So all you need to do is just tap away from your curve on your object, and that'll delete the curve. If for some reason you can't do that, or you prefer this method more, you can also go into Stroke, Curve Functions, Delete, and that'll delete any curves. Now remember, this is auto masked. So if we go into solo mode here, you're going to see my little null star here has a mask on it. So all I need to do is go in here to split unmask points or mask points or whatever you want to do. Then that'll go ahead and keep the star and then split off these points as their own subtool. And again, the reason we put this null object in here is because this cube here had subdivision history. If you want to undo that, let's just drag that back. So just be aware that undo history does not play well with curve brushes. So back to our cube with no subdivision history. You're also going to see we have a curve step. So when we're dragging this sphere out, the curve step's set at 1. They all just, you got one sphere touching another sphere, touching another sphere. They're all very evenly spaced. If we crank that curve step closer and we tap to update, they're going to see now they're going to overlap. So that curve step is going to dictate how small the distance is. So it's less. So if we do like 0.5, they should go right down the middle of each sphere. If we go to, let's say, 2, now they're going to be spaced out. If we go 1.5, now when you go to update curve spacing, sometimes the curve will update correctly, sometimes it won't. Just something to be aware of. But anyway, that looks pretty good. And again, we can manipulate this thing here. And you can do this with anything you want. So if we go up here, let's go ahead and go out of edit mode, hit Control N. Let's grab a sphere 3D, go into edit mode, make polymesh 3D. Let's go ahead and scale this down here. Let's go ahead and mask. Hold down Control Alt and mask this side here. We'll use our gizmo here. We'll move the gizmo out, and then we'll just Z-scale this back to flatten this end here. So now you've got kind of a flat sphere-looking thing. I'm going to snap to the front to capture it. Brush, create insert mesh new. Go ahead and turn on curve mode, and now you can just drag out a curve, and it's got your object oriented correctly along that curve. Now if I undo that, and let's go back to where our sphere was, let's say we want to mask this top out here, invert that, and then we'll just scale this end here to flatten it out. And you know what? I should probably bring this up. We haven't gotten to these yet. You can also use clip curve. It's a little bit easier, but I'm trying to stay away from stuff we haven't talked about yet. But anyway, we can take this object now. We can go to Brush, create insert mesh. We can append it. Yeah, let's append it. We'll go ahead and append it there. So now you've got 2. We need to turn on, curve mode will be on for both of these. However, the other settings won't be. So this will inherit curve mode. And just like when we were insert mesh brushing, Z intensity is dictating how thick these things are. So if we drop our Z intensity down and then touch to update the curve, you're going to see it's going to flatten. Be a flatter representation. We can bump it up, and then I'll puff them back out. And just like insert mesh brushes, underneath brush modifiers here, we have a strength multiplier. If you crank that up, that'll go ahead and over crank your original insert mesh brush. If you go back up here to the curve options, you're going to see we have snapshot and smooth. So if you have a curve that's very, very bendy, and then you go over here and you hit the smooth key, that's also a hotkey for that is 6, you're going to see it's going to smooth that curve out. So when you tap to update it, it'll go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and make this a little bit more obvious. So we can do this, and then you can say smooth that curve. And the smooth curve smoothness, if you drop this down, you can hit smooth, it'll smooth a little bit less. And then when you tap to update, that'll go ahead and update. This mesh doesn't really, it kind of interpenetrates with each other, so it's probably not the best one to do this with. However, because it's a curve brush, if we go to BI brush insert, remember all these curve brushes we skipped because we were just talking about insert mesh brushes? Let's go to Army Curve, hit M. I'm going to go ahead and grab that bike chain, and all I got to do is tap this curve, and it'll update this curve to the bike chain. So there we have a really bendy curve. We can say smooth that curve, tap to update, and it'll go ahead and smooth that curve out for us. Now, if you want to be very specific, like you want to, put one end of the curve here, and then we'll just continue this down, get that red rubber band, and we'll go here. And we can go to, this curve, the lock start, that's where we started the curve. I want to go ahead and lock that. And then the end, I don't want to lock. So I can just pull this out, and that way that start will be locked. Or I can go ahead and put the end curve where I want it, say lock end, and now I can just move the middle of this around, and it'll lock both of those for me. If I tap off, that'll go ahead and make this curve available for me to use. I can split it off, and I can also just drag out copies of that if I want to. And another thing to mention, let's go ahead and scrub this all the way back here. If we drag out a curve, let's turn off bend and snap, lock start and lock end. And you're also going to see we have snapshot here, that's 5. So if we hit the 5 key, it'll keep our curve, but when we move it, it'll just move that out. So we can keep hitting 5, and that'll also make duplicates. Now, of course, you don't have to turn off bend and snap. You can hit 5 and then move this off, but because you have snap turned on, it's going to want to snap to that original object, so it's going to be kind of bumpy. So usually I'll turn snap off, and then I can just pull out a copy of this thing. Let's go ahead and get rid of all this. Unmask. Control drag to unmask. And before we get to these options, let's talk about try curve brush. Now that you've learned how curve brushes work, let's go ahead and apply that to brush stroke. So one cool brush you can use for that, if we go into our tool palette here, go to Z-Sphere, edit mode, make polymesh 3D, Control D to subdivide that up quite a few times. Let's say up to 2 million. If we hit BD, You're going to see in ZBrush 2020 and beyond, there's Deco Curve Dots and Deco Curve Drag Dot. Honestly, I like Deco Curve Drag Dot a little bit better. They're both pretty cool, but we're going to start with Deco Curve Drag Dot. So you can see by default, we have these three settings, Drag Dot, Stroke, and Arrow Alpha. And if we just click and drag on our mesh, it's going to leave a curve behind. Now, we have subdivided this, and we're able to leave curves behind, so that's kind of cool for a brush stroke that has curves on it. And if we just drag a curve off, you see nothing really happens, but if we tap on this curve, you're going to see it updates with this alpha. And the cool thing about this brush is it's really kind of non-destructive. If I hold down Alt and tap, it'll go inwards. If I let go of Alt and just drag, it'll drag outwards. You can also change the Z intensity on the fly. You can paint with it if you want. If you turn RGB on, you can choose like a red color. Actually, let's go over here to turn Colorize on. Now we can poly paint with it. And just like any of the other curve stuff, you can go through here. You can manipulate this curve. You can hit 6. So we go to the stroke menu here. If you guys remember, open up curve functions, curve modifiers. You can go in here and hit 6 for smooth, or you can even do a snapshot, which is really cool. So you can go and update this. And now if I hit 5 as a snapshot, and again, you turned off bend here, you can actually drag this stroke right along the surface of this mesh. So you can keep hitting 5 and just keep dragging that stroke along here. And then if you turn bend back on, now you can go back in through here and you can kind of bend the stroke around. So you can hit 5 to save a snapshot, and then just continue to drag the stroke off, and maybe hit 5, take a snapshot, and then continue to drag the stroke around. You can also go in here to elastic or liquid. If you do liquid, you'll be able to pull back along that alpha and shrink it up, or extend it back out, for example. And then elastic, you can go through here and you can just keep adding onto this stroke or adding onto this stroke and leave this one locked. Speaking of locked, you can still go back in here and you can turn on lock start and lock end if you're not in elastic or liquid mode. Well, actually, yeah. So you can go through there and you can turn on lock start and lock end and just pull that brush stroke alpha along that surface. And again, you can hold down Alt, punch that in, and Alt's going to do your alternate color. So to punch in and grab your alternate color, or again, just tap on it. You can even swap the alpha out. If you go in here and change it to a star, now you have a star stroke. So let's go ahead and turn on liquid and we'll pull this back. Now you can see that little star alpha a little bit better. You see in the curve modifiers, you do have a curve fall off. Just make sure intensity is off if you want a nice even alpha along the length of the stroke here. So if we, we'll go ahead and turn off liquid and we'll switch this just over to a regular old alpha 06. So you can see this is the stroke result that we're getting. You can turn on intensity, and you can go through here and you can modify this so it kind of goes from not intense to very intense, or the opposite. You can go from very intense to not intense. Kind of does the opposite. So you can use this to your advantage, or if you want an even stroke, just go ahead and turn intensity off. Now, just like with any other curve brush, you can use this curve to hop between brushes. So I'm going to go to BD Brush Deco. We'll go to Deco Curve Dot Stroke. So now it's back to our arrow alpha, and now we have a dot stroke applied. So we can go through here, and now when we use this stroke, we don't have RGB turned on, so it's not leaving back RGB information, but it's going to stroke that alpha through our object. So we tap off, that'll delete our curve, then we can drag a new curve on here and just pull, and that'll pull that arrow alpha through our object. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, you can do your textures as well. So if you grab this rainbow texture here, and we update this, and we go ahead and say turn on RGB, have colorize turned on, we can drag Z, and it doesn't have to be a Z add. You can turn Z add off and just paint with this brush here. So now we can paint along that stroke. Of course, we go into the texture menu and we rotate this so that it's going from red, well, red to red, but going along this way. You can see now we can paint down the rainbow gradient. And same thing if we go back into BD drag dot here. So we can go ahead and swap this texture out. And now you can see we got the rainbow going down our stroke here. And then one more time, we'll go ahead and hit, because this is my favorite functionality, being able to hit 5, turning off bend, and having this stroke be able to snap to your surface is pretty cool. I like that. But anyway, a lot of different uses you could probably figure out for this brush. And like I said before, it's pretty non-destructive and uses that nice curve functionality you just learned about. And actually, one more thing I should mention, you can do this for any stroke. So if I go to my standard brush here, and then we go to stroke, turn on curve mode, I can just drag out a curve, and then I have the standard brush stroke here that I can utilize. And if I change this to a drag dot stroke, again, it's going to have this alpha, for example, just spread out over the entire stroke based on my standard brush. I can hold down Alt, let go of Alt, So same functionality, but applied to my standard brush.